You are watching The World 24/7 on the NDTV network. I'm Parmeshwar Bawa. Let's begin with the top stories you need to know. Well, the US President Joe Biden has signed a presidential pardon for his son, Hunter Biden, a reversal from previous statements he would grant him neither a pardon nor commutation. Syrian and Russian jets are stepping up strikes on opposition forces in northern Syria in retaliation for the sudden offensive that has cost the regime control of the country's second largest city, Aleppo. US President-elect Donald Trump threatened to impose 100% tariffs on Brics countries that move away from the dollar, further raising fears of a multi-front trade war. Some nations in the bloc, which includes Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa and others, have called for challenging the dollar's dominance as the world's reserve currency. Russian President Vladimir Putin approved budget plans, raising 2025 military spending to record levels as Moscow seeks to prevail in the war in Ukraine. Now, around 32.5% of the budget posted on a government website has been allocated for national defense. The death toll from sectarian violence in Pakistan's restive Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province surged to 130, with at least 6 people killed and 8 injured on Sunday, as clashes in the volatile Khurram district continued for the 11th consecutive day. The big story we're tracking from the United States at the moment: Joe Biden has signed a presidential pardon for his son Hunter Biden, a reversal from previous statements that he would grant him neither a pardon nor commutation. Now, why does this matter? Well, you must note that presidents in the US regularly sign pardons at the end of their terms, but they rarely involve cases where their own family members are in the middle of the legal process. Hunter was set to appear at the sentencing hearings on the 12th and 16th of December. And Hunter Biden, as you know, was the first child of a sitting US president to face criminal charges. He was actually convicted on felony gun charges this summer and pleaded guilty on felony tax charges. So despite the White House's assurances last month that the US president had no intentions of pardoning his son, the announcement has finally now come through. The other big story we're tracking: the reignited war in Syria is the latest fallout from the turmoil that has gripped the Middle East since the Hamas attacks on Israel on the 7th of October last year. Rebel forces in Syria have taken control of much of Aleppo, including the city's airport, following a surprise offensive that reawakened the country's stalled civil war. But the fighting poses the most serious challenge in years to President Bashar al-Assad, and Syrian and Russian jets have stepped up retaliatory strikes over the weekend, especially on Sunday. The rebel success so far is being considered a direct consequence of wars elsewhere, as per many analysts. My colleague Mohammad Ghazali has been tracking all the details for us very closely. He joins us live at the moment. Ghazali, take us through the latest developments.
See, the rebels have taken control of Aleppo, as we know, and Idlib as well. Most parts of Aleppo and Idlib are under their control, but the regime forces, that say the forces of Bashar al-Assad in Syria, are still saying that perhaps the strikes, the aerial strikes being carried out by Russia in support of Assad, has also able to thwart these attempts by the rebels to take control of the situation. But the visuals coming out from the region certainly shows that the regime forces were certainly taken by surprise by the way these rebel forces have been marching there. And if you see the sequence of events and how it happened, just days after, a couple of days after Israel announced, or United States brokered the ceasefire between Lebanon and Israel, Israeli Prime Minister Mr. Benjamin Netanyahu had threatened Mr. Assad that he's playing with fire. And just after that, the moment the ceasefire was brokered, it was announced that now there will be no ceasefire violation. There will be no attacks from either side. The rebels certainly started attacking positions of the Syrian army in Syria. But what is more threatening right now, and how it is different from 2011 Arab Spring and the developments after that, is that this time around, there are multiple groups who have been fighting against Assad's army in Syria. And back then in 2011 and 12, we had seen the rise of ISIS there, the rise of many extremist elements in Syria, which led to sectarian violence, which led to violence against minorities who are Kurds, who are not Sunnis, Shias. So this time around, Assad has certainly been caught by surprise. He flew to Moscow a couple of days ago before this attack started. and he was asking for assistance from Russia. And that is when the Russia is already invested in Ukraine's war, but it had to divert resources here. And aerial strikes have somewhere thwarted the attempt of the rebel forces. But it looks very unlikely that how long can they continue to push back the rebel forces now, because even there have been reports emerging from the area that, like what we see in Afghanistan, when Taliban was approaching towards Kabul, a lot of the Afghani forces had surrendered their posts, and this is exactly what is being reported from some of the areas in Aleppo and Idlib, that how the forces just left the spot with their weapons, with their ammunition, and the rebel forces are gaining that as well. So it is going to be very challenging times in the next 24 to 48 hours to see the approach and progress of these rebel forces, that whether they'll continue to make a push beyond Idlib, beyond Aleppo, or whether they will be contained there by the aerial strikes from Russia.
As always, Ghazali, thank you so much for contextualizing the latest details for us. Well, many continue to question why Assad's forces were so suddenly vulnerable. Well, for further clarity, we also have with us on the broadcast David K. Johnston from the Rochester Institute of Technology. As always, sir, thank you for making time for us. Is it a fair assessment that al-Assad's allies, which are Iran, Russia and Hezbollah, are all embroiled in their own conflicts, and Turkey, which backs the rebels, took advantage in the situation?
I think that's exactly what you're seeing. The Assad regime over the last 25 years has not expanded its base much beyond Damascus.
Right.
It has created a lot of enemies through its brutality. The Russians are not in a position to give very much support, not the way they did back about 10 years ago because of the war in Ukraine. And the rebels have been able to unite a diverse group of people. The Kurds, people who were part of ISIS and other interests in the Levant, to try and take down this regime.
With this crisis, though, in Ukraine at the moment, in Gaza and Lebanon, all coming together and overlapping in Aleppo, would you say this is a tectonic shift of kinds?
Well, if the rebels can continue to advance and the police and soldiers drop their weapons basically and run off, which we've seen so far, that would suggest that the regime is in serious danger. One of the reasons Moscow can't do anything is that the Ukraine war has the Russians taking stocks of weapons, tanks, trucks that were in mothballs from the Soviet era and trying to put them into use. And the Russians are losing approximately 1,600 soldiers a day in Ukraine. During World War II, the U.S. only lost 300 soldiers a day on average while fighting wars in both Asia and Europe. So Russia's ability to help the Assad regime is very limited. They, of course, want to do that because Syria has provided them with a warm water port in the Mediterranean for their warships.
Right. So would you then argue also that Iran, meanwhile, which has come off worse in its direct military exchanges with Israel, as many would argue, may also be more cautious to step in or allow its proxies to step in as well?
Well, we haven't seen the Iranians yet do anything terribly significant in this field, and they certainly have their interests tied down a great deal by the wars involving Israel. And Iran, at some point, like every other country, has limited resources. Clearly, the Iranian government wants to support this regime, but we haven't seen them really step up to the plate.
But for the Middle East, it's actually quite tragic. There is a bitter irony that as one conflict comes to a halt with the ceasefire in one place, another one has restarted. So do you think it all gets much worse before it does begin to get better?
Well, I don't know necessarily that overthrowing the Assad regime is worse. It might be much better for the 22 or 23 million people who live in Syria and the million or so who have been displaced. But there's going to be more death and violence for sure. This civil war that started in 2011 has already cost roughly 500,000 Syrians their lives, and
Yes.
2/3 of those have been non-combatants. So it may get worse, but it's distinctly possible we will see a better government in Syria than the brutal dictator who's been in charge since the turn of the century.
As always, sir, thank you so much for joining us with the latest updates and contextualizing the information with us on NDTV. With that, let's turn our attention now to the neighborhood. Well, sectarian violence continued in Pakistan's northwest over the weekend, killing at least 14 people and wounding 27 in the past 24 hours in the Kurram district that's located in the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province near the border with Afghanistan. Now, this brings the death toll from the fighting over the last 10 days to at least 130, with 200 people wounded. And violence has escalated in the region since the 21st of November, as we have been covering, when gunmen opened the fire on convoys carrying Shia pilgrims, and the attack killed 52 people, which included women and children. No group has claimed responsibility for the assault, but a little context for you here. Kurram is the only district in Pakistan where Shia make up the majority of the population, in contrast to the rest of the country, where Sunnis are the majority. And now we are getting confirmed reports of 130 deaths due to sectarian violence there. From Islamabad, for a ground report, we have with us senior journalist Hamza Amir. Thank you so much for making time for us. Now, Kurram, which is near the border with Afghanistan, has been a flashpoint for sectarian tensions for decades, as we know. But what is the current state of affairs? How intense are matters in Pakistan?
See, in Kurram agency of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, it's basically about the Para-Chinar region, in which 40% or at least 50% of the population it comprises of Shia Muslims, and the sectarian violence in there on territory and also on the basis of sectarianism differences between the tribes there has been deadly for a very long time. Even in the latest clashes, over 150 people have died, and locals claim that still continues to rise because the violence does not stop. Recently, just a day before, as Chief Minister of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province, Ali Amin Gandapur, has shared a jirga in which he has called in for deployment of paramilitary troops, or even for the army deployment to ensure security in the area, which is something that the local tribes do not agree to. And the sectarian violence is so deadly that even when it started, when only 47 people were killed in an attack on a passenger vehicle convoy, which was passing through a certain area of the Kurram agency, all of those people hailed from the Shiite community. In response to that, there were announcements made by the Shia extremist groups that they are going to burn down villages from where these gunshots were heard, and exactly the same kind of scenes were witnessed the day after, when a whole village was burned down, people were burnt, they were shot dead, and it was a bloodbath all day in that area, resulting in even more deaths of Sunni sectarian tribes. Now the local tribes are trying to ease the tension down, de-escalate it, and that initial truce of a week was reached, but still, after a few days of that, it was breached and the clashes have started. The government seems to have failed to actually establish its writ and its strength in the area. It's only the local tribes and the sectarian violence that continues to go on. Some say that the Iranian Beg Zainabiyun militant group of the Shiite organization is behind it, and others say that Afghanistan-backed groups of the Sunni sects are basically a part of the strength behind the Sunni tribes. Unfortunately, this area has been witnessing the bloodbath of sectarian violence for a very long time, and the security forces, along with the state and the provincial government, have always fallen short as far as ensuring security and peace in the area is concerned. If I may remind you, some time back, when the ceasefire was not reached and the violence continued, over 30 days were spent without any supplies and routes being blocked in the Para-Chinar.
In fact, we're still hearing that the closure of the shops has created a scarcity of oil, food commodities, as well as medicines in the region. Thank you so much, as always, Hamza Amir, for joining us with that ground report. Many argue, as we speak, that the 10-day truce brokered just last week has actually been rendered ineffective by intermittent violence. In fact, I must also inform our viewers that in Pakistan, in this area, internet services have also been suspended in the region since the clashes. With that, let's turn our attention to the United States. Well, President-elect Donald Trump has threatened Brics countries of 100% tariffs if they try to move away from the US dollar and carry their own international trade using a separate Brics currency. In fact, in a post on X, Trump has said the idea that Brics countries are trying to move away from the dollar while we stand by and watch is over. India, China, Russia, Brazil, and South Africa are the key partners of BRICS. Now, as you all are aware, BRICS, which was formed in 2009, is the only major international group of which the United States is not a part. The members are India, Russia, China, Brazil, South Africa, Iran, Egypt, Ethiopia, and the UAE. And for the past few years, Russia and China have been seeking an alternative to the US dollar or creating a BRICS currency. Now, where does India stand in this equation? Well, India has not supported the currency move, but has allowed trade settlements in rupees with countries like Russia and the UAE, and continues to discuss the issue with Indonesia as well. My colleague Mohammed Ghazali is tracking the latest developments for us. He joins us live at the moment with an update on this story as well. Ghazali, Trump's latest threat. Take us through what it means for BRICS countries.
See, first of all, it's very ironic that being a democratic country, you have to threaten other countries in the world to ensure that you engage with them in trade and investment. But as far as you rightly pointed out, last year, we saw Dr. Jaishankar before the BRICS meet only saying that perhaps this discussion on having a BRICS currency is not going to materialize, or India showing its stand very clear. And there are very specific reasons for that. India's economy is growing right now, and it has very good relations with Europe and the West, and it has not intended any way to show that they want to de-dollarize the entire trade and investment with any country they're dealing with. But certainly in the recent BRICS summit in Kazan, the Indian Prime Minister as well as the Foreign Minister in their meet has hinted that trade in local currencies with the countries which you're dealing with has been promoted. India has been promoting that, but a separate currency is something which India has never backed. And it also said that even with what you say, that local currency or a currency not other than the dollar, India had its own reservations in the previous BRICS summit, in this year's BRICS summit as well. And India also has good relations with the United States. As you see that Trump having appointed a lot of Indian Americans or those officials who have a good rapport, a history of having good rapport or image with India, is certainly something which India is also considering. And that is why in Kazan, India didn't promote that part. India didn't support that part. And but after this recent statement from Donald Trump, the president-elect, India has not reacted it now. But we know the precedent that what India's stand has been when it comes to de-dollarization of economy.
As always, Mohammed Ghazali, thank you so much for joining us with that latest update. As my colleague Ghazali just briefly mentioned, America's first fighter Kash Patel has been picked as the new FBI director in the incoming US government. He's part of the Indian Americans that are going to be part of the incoming US government, as Donald Trump has nominated his close confidant, Kashyap Patel, also known as Kash Patel, for the powerful position of director of the Federal Bureau of Investigation there. Now with this, Mr. Patel will be the highest-ranking Indian American in Trump's new administration. A little bit of a background about him. Kash Patel was born in New York to parents of Gujarati origin who emigrated from East Africa to the US. And he was raised a Hindu, making him the third after Tulsi Gabbard and Vivek Ramaswamy from the community to be picked for Trump's new inner circle. Here are the details on his background.
I kept hearing about there's a guy named Cash that works for you. He's phenomenal.
U.S. President-elect Donald Trump has selected loyal former aide and Indian-American Pentagon official Kashyap or Kash Patel to lead the FBI. Trump made the announcement on his social media platform Truth Social. Patel has been nominated to reform the agency and remove those he sees as conspirators. The selection reflects Trump's push for drastic changes and his desire for retribution against his supposed adversaries. A staunch ally of Trump, Patel served as chief of staff at the Department of Defense during Trump's first term and has been a vocal critic of the FBI. He is a prominent advocate for dismantling what he calls the deep state within the U.S. government. Trump has praised Patel's contributions during his first term, claiming that he spent his career exposing corruption and played a crucial role in exposing the Russia hoax. Patel shares Trump's skepticism of government institutions. In his memoir, Government Gangsters, Patel proposed curbing what he describes as government tyranny at the FBI by firing its top leadership and dramatically reducing its power. Patel has also suggested closing down the Bureau's headquarters in Washington and, quote, reopening it the next day as a museum of the deep state, end quote. Patel's nomination also highlights Trump's dissatisfaction with current FBI Director Christopher Wray. Appointed by Trump in 2017 to a 10-year term, Wray has clashed with Trump on several occasions, particularly over FBI investigations involving the former president. While critics warn that Patel's appointment could threaten the FBI's independence, supporters argue his leadership might bring long overdue reforms to the agency. Samia Afsar, NDTV World.
Also, Donald Trump has announced that he plans to nominate Massad Boulos, a Lebanese-American businessman, and wait for it, the father-in-law of his daughter Tiffany, as a senior advisor on Arab and Middle Eastern affairs. Trump has kept many family members close, and just a day earlier, he named Charles Kushner, his daughter Ivanka's father-in-law, as the new ambassador to France. Trump made the announcement about Boulos on Truth Social, praising his business expertise and his role in engaging Arab American and Muslim voters during his campaign. Let's turn our attention now to the Middle East, where Israeli forces killed at least 10 Palestinians in an attack on Beit Lahia in northern Gaza, taking the death toll from the attacks just on Sunday to 34 people. Meanwhile, a top medical official in Gaza has accused Israeli forces of using internationally prohibited weapons in the enclave that causes entire bodies to vaporize. And the UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees has said it is halting shipments through the Karem Abu Salem crossing between Israel and Gaza after a series of attacks on their 8 convoys. Well, news and updates continue in a moment right here on NDTV. We're taking a quick break for now. Welcome back. Let's get you a quick update from Bangladesh now, where after the arrest of a second monk, Shyam Das Prabhu, following the arrest of Chinmoy Krishna Das Brahmachari, 2 other ISKCON priests have also gone missing, according to Radharam Das, ISKCON Vice President spokesperson in Kolkata. While there is no official comment on the arrest or detention of Shyam Das Prabhu and 2 other devotees who had reportedly gone to deliver food to Chinmoy Krishna Das, reports of attacks on Hindus continue to pour in from Bangladesh. Subsequently, I must also inform you, a journalist, Munni Saha, has also been taken into custody in Bangladesh after she was targeted by radical Islamist forces and also surrounded by a mob. In other news, massive protests erupted in Georgia over the government's decision to suspend the country's bid to join the European Union. Authorities have in fact clamped down hard on the demonstrations, prompting condemnation from the United States. Police actually fired tear gas and used water cannons, as you can see on those dramatic visuals coming in, and more than 40 people were injured over the weekend. The unrest has sparked a crisis for Georgia's ruling party, which has been criticized for seemingly steering the country away from Brussels and into Moscow's orbit. But the Prime Minister in Georgia accused the opposition of plotting to overthrow the government, while the country's pro-EU president has called for fresh elections. As always, thank you for investing your time and watching this edition of The World 24/7. We'll keep tracking the latest updates for you. Do stay tuned.